Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to wait just a couple more seconds as folks are logging in and as the live stream catches up. So welcome to day 2. You made it. You're here. Hopefully you all had a great day 1, and I know we're looking forward to some stellar presentations this morning as well. So as we begin our second day of programming, we do want to say thank you again to all of the great speakers, sponsors, and volunteers who have provided us with such an excellent conference experience. We also want to let you know that there will be an opportunity to provide your feedback on this virtual experience following the symposium. Please do fill out the survey you'll receive in your email inbox and let us know how we did. Putting on an event like this is, in a matter of months, is no small feat for sure. So thank you for sharing your advice with us in case we ever have to do it again. And I know Tina is hoping and praying that does not happen. But I'm John Kraus, as you probably know. I'm the Vice President of the Board for CPGR, also the Executive Director of Gift Planning at the University of Denver, and I'm introducing our speaker this morning as a sponsor. DU is a bronze sponsor of the symposium, and we have been supporters for several years, and we're proud to do so again this year. University of Denver supports CPGR because it provides vital programs and services to the Colorado Plan Giving community that would not be possible without its sponsors, its members, and its generous donors. And we also support CPGR because it's great visibility for the University of Denver in the community. So we have lots of great programs tailored to working professionals, including continuing ed credits, certificate programs, leadership experiences, and fully online master's degrees like our MBA at Denver and our master's in nonprofit leadership. So feel free to visit du.edu or just connect with me afterwards for more information. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce a true legend in the world of plan giving and a perennial favorite at Summer Symposium, Craig Wruck. Craig's experience in charitable giving spans more than 40 years in leadership positions in both nonprofit and for-profit organizations, including Humboldt State University, University of Minnesota, the St. Paul Community Foundation, as well as U.S. Trust Company and U.S. Bank. He currently serves as a senior advisor for PG Calc and is past president of the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners. Craig is also the author of Plan Giving in a Nutshell, which if you've attended his Essentials course in the past, that comes with the course, so many of us have that on our bookshelves. And he earned his MBA from the University of St. Thomas and bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Utah. So Craig is going to be talking to us today about the first ever legacy giving report from GivingUSA, which I know we're all very eager to hear more about. Craig, I'm sorry you can't be with us in Colorado this year, but so glad that you could join us virtually, and I will let you take it from here.
Thank you, John. This has been a wonderful experience, and I really do want to thank all of the volunteers and all the time that went into this. My experience yesterday was pleasantly surprising. It's no substitute for being at the Inverness, but it was a pretty darn good summer symposium. So thanks to all of you, because I know you had to adapt on the fly. Before I get into the meat of the presentation, just a couple of notes. One is the GivingUSA special report on legacy giving is just a mountain of data and commentary. And so in order to give you as much information as possible in as compact a way as possible, I used a lot of the charts and graphs from the report. And I tried to enlarge those on the slides, but if you're having trouble seeing them, I would really suggest that you download the slides. There's a full-page version of the slides, and that might be easier to read. The other thing I would ask you to do while we're going through this report is full of some challenging findings, heresies, if you will. I don't mean heresies in the way that threatens your immortal soul, but heresies in the sense that it really challenges a lot of the things that we've assumed to be true. So I would ask as we go through, try to suppress that little voice in your head that tries to argue with things. These are simply what actual plan giving donors told us. I hope to be able to get through a lot of information here. It's tough to know in this new format. I think I've timed it well so that we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. You can enter them into that chat box anytime you want. I'll try to keep an eye on them, but I hope we can reserve a few minutes at the end. If not, I'll be happy to respond to emails after the presentation. And then finally, and I'm not getting any commission from the GivingUSA Foundation, I hope that this will convince you to get your hands on a copy of this report and read it and think about it. It's really a groundbreaking piece of work. So with that, let me launch into the slides, and I want to make certain that you see what I think you're seeing. Here we go. You are now. We are now looking at my slides. The GivingUSA Foundation conducted an extensive study of planned giving donors. It's the first study in many, many years that actually polled donors about why they made their planned gifts. That report was released in the fall of 2019. You may have missed it. You may feel sort of like that person that wanders through the room while you're trying to watch Hamilton on the Disney Channel and wants to know, did I miss anything important? And the fact is, yes, you did. You missed some pretty important stuff. The report itself was issued on November 7th, 2019. There was quite a bit of fanfare around it. There was a video conference. You can still watch that for free. But then it sort of faded because after all, November, we were getting into the busy season. It was the time for year-end gifts. There probably wasn't much time to worry about the report. And if you got a copy at all, I'm guessing that you set it aside saying that you would read it after the first of the year. Of course, we've been a little busy. We've been a little distracted since the first of the year. There were the wildfires in Australia and New Zealand. You probably forgot about those. There was a U.S. drone strike that killed an Iranian military leader. Harry and Meghan left the palace. Iran retaliated and attacked one of our bases. The impeachment trial of President Trump started. Kobe Bryant was killed in a helicopter crash, and Great Britain withdrew from the European Union. And that was just January. And then things really started to speed up. The Democrats failed to count ballots in Iowa for weeks and weeks. The Senate acquitted President Trump. Harvey Weinstein went to jail. The stock market had one of its worst days ever. George Floyd was killed here in my town in Minneapolis. And of course, the backdrop for all of that was the pandemic. So if you didn't get around to reading the report, that's perfectly understandable. The good news is we'll spend some time today going through it in some detail. The report itself, when you get to read it, is a bit of a feedback sandwich. And if you've ever been called into the HR office or maybe the principal's office in high school, you know what a feedback sandwich is. It starts with a bit of a positive comment, then you get the bad news, the corrective feedback, and then it's left to make you encouraged after all of that. And that's really how this report is arranged. The positive comment comes fairly early on. The baby boomers' intergenerational transfer of wealth is projected to be close to $60 trillion in just the next couple of decades. And that's actually great news. If it were averaged out, that's about $1.5 trillion a year, $1,500 billion a year. That's more than 3 times total giving in 2019. So the positive comment starts there. There's an enormous opportunity that is just beginning for us. Then comes the constructive feedback. And the report finds that even with all the advances that we've made in marketing and stewardship and collaboration with allied and legal professionals and the increasing ability of organizations to even accept these complex gifts, we haven't been able to normalize what is arguably one of the most democratic and accessible types of individual philanthropy. Let me highlight that because I think that's the indictment. What the report is really saying is what we've been doing hasn't been working well. It's not saying that everything that we've been doing is wrong, but the report does say that about 5% of the population used to leave bequest to charity, and after all of our effort for decades and decades, it's still about 5%. So I think one of the things the report challenges us to do is figure out how we need to adapt, figure out how we need to change, because clearly what we're doing is not paying off for our organizations. And I think particularly these days, it's important for us to be responsible stewards of our organizations. It ends on a positive note. The encouraging comment is the report suggests that all fundraisers should be equipped with a basic knowledge of planned giving, and be prepared to ask and encourage donors to make planned gifts. It's really a call to arms for planned giving. So it ends on a very upbeat note. I want to make a couple of notes about the structure of the study, and there is also available for you to download a one-page infographic that talks about how the study was created and has some highlights. I'd encourage you to take a look at that. The researchers approached this with several questions. One was they wanted to understand how and why donors decide to make planned gifts, legacy gifts is the term they use. And at what point in their lives do they make these gifts? They wanted to try to get a handle on what are the barriers, what stops them from giving and from disclosing these gifts, because that's a real phenomenon. And then they tried to analyze a bit what sort of institutional factors could contribute to legacy giving, could encourage legacy giving. The study itself seemed to be very well designed. They surveyed individual donors, people who had made planned gifts, and then conducted follow-up in-depth interviews with a number of those who responded to the survey. That field work was done January through April of 2019. It was in collaboration with more than 24 organizations around the country. So there were planned giving officers who worked on this. A couple of notes. One is churches tend to be a little underrepresented in this sample. And the reason was it was very difficult to identify planned giving donors through church organizations because they tend to be very local. So you can read more about that in the study. The researchers and I want you to know there are some limitations to this study. These results are not representative of the general population or even of all donors. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is the subjects have already made a planned gift, or at least they're considering making a planned gift, and they have informed the charity. So that puts them in a rarefied group. These are not average person on the street. Second is a majority of the respondents were white and higher educated and wealthier than the norm. And then finally, it's important to remember this field work was conducted in January through April of 2019. So this is how people answered these questions almost a full year before we knew anything about the pandemic or any of those other things that I mentioned earlier. Still, I think it's incredibly valuable to have this information, because keep in mind as we go through this is what people who have actually done what we spend our time encouraging people to do. They have made a gift and they have informed us about it. This is what they had to say about that experience, about their reasons for giving. So even though this is not representative of the population as a whole, I think it's an important voice for us to hear. So now we'll start digging into, and I will refer to the figure numbers here in case you're reading along in the handouts. Figure 1, most people write their first will prior to age 60. I was a bit surprised by that, and in fact a good share of people write their first will in their 30s. And by the time they're 60, most people who are going to write a will have probably already written a will. I think this is the beginning of a question we should probably ask about how we market planned gifts. In my experience, we try to reserve as much budget as we can for marketing planned giving, and then we market to the oldest constituents we can find. And actually, people are starting to write their wills much, much earlier, I think, than maybe we initially thought. Interestingly, though, among donors with charitable gifts in their will, more than half of them said their very first will or trust included a charitable gift. If you look at figure 7, the lighter colored bars are the age at which they wrote their first will, and then the darker colored bars are the age at which they made their first charitable gift. And as you can see, only in the first couple of groups is it imbalanced. After that, people were including a charitable gift in their will the very first time that they wrote a will. So it's interesting to me, oftentimes our strategy is to try to get into people's thinking later on because we assume that's when they're making these sorts of decisions. At least this population tells us, no, not so. Actually, they are charitable very early on in the process. They They make those gifts early on, and they stay there. Also interesting, people tend to rewrite their wills fairly often. They don't just write one and then they're done. 2, 3, sometimes even 4 or 5 times do they change their wills over their lifetime. And note that each time they change it, it would be an opportunity for our charitable bequest to be eliminated. We'll see in a minute they tend not to do that. The reasons on the right side of this screen are interesting to me. Some of the things you would expect. I'm surprised that birth of a child is as low as it is, but an increase in assets or marriage, I understand that. Death of a loved one, that makes sense. Interesting to me is retirement reported only about 2% of the time. Does that cause a will to be changed around? And again, as I think of the conversations or the bias, if you will, that we bring to our conversations with donors, we tend to think, oh my gosh, he's getting near retirement, he must be thinking about his estate plans. Turns out maybe not. Maybe it's some of those other life changes. Maybe that's when we ought to be thinking about talking to donors, when they've had a major financial event, when they've had an increase in assets. Those are probably better times to begin this conversation. The next slide, table 4. Here's where we begin to learn that once they make these gifts, these revocable gifts, they're most likely to maintain them or even increase them, and only rarely do they decrease or eliminate them. So the question that was asked was, as you changed your plan over the years, did you change or increase or decrease your charitable giving? More than half of the people said they didn't change it at all. 95%, so 50% plus 44%, 95% said, no, I left it in there, or I even increased it. So this notion that we have that it's a revocable gift and therefore it isn't a real gift, our donors don't seem to look at it that way. They see this as a gift that they intend to maintain over their lifetime. Shifting gears a bit here, some of the study looked at how the process works. How do people make these complicated plan gifts? Interestingly, those in their 30s, 40s, through their 50s were more likely to have worked with an attorney. And those age 70 and over were more likely to have worked with a representative of a nonprofit. Now, that could be because that's where we focus our attention. I don't think most plan giving officers devote a lot of time to talking to 30-somethings about plan gifts. So that could be a reason for this. But plan giving donors report that, for the most part, they worked with a legal advisor to create that plan gift. Another look at this, one of the questions that was asked of donors is, how difficult was it? And how did you do it? Almost half said it was either very easy or somewhat easy. And only 1 out of 5 said it was somewhat difficult to very difficult. More interesting to me is the information you see in Table 1. And if you look at Table 1, just a bit of explanation, that those factors there, the 3-digit numbers, 1 is very easy and 5 is very difficult. So a lower number here is better. And as I dig into this, there are a couple of things here that worry me a bit. First of all, 2.5 we should consider, I guess, right in the middle. I wrote it myself, seems to be easier. That could be a skewed figure, and if you dig into the details behind the report, there weren't very many people who answered it that way. Working with a legal advisor or a financial advisor, somewhat easy, but look at there toward the bottom. Working with a representative from a nonprofit, 2.79. Now, those seem like small numbers, but that's actually a quantum increase in difficultness, if you will, from working with a legal advisor. And so one of the things that I think we should think about is, are we actually making this more complicated for donors? Are we maybe giving them too many choices to make or not enough help? I don't know the answers to these questions, but at least this set of respondents reported that working with a representative from a nonprofit actually made the whole thing a bit more difficult. And I think that should be concerning. I think that should be concerning to us. The study asked about where did you get this idea in the first place? Figure 20 probably should be no surprise. A good share of people, 40% or more, said that they first learned about legacy giving from a nonprofit. Relatively fewer from a financial planner or from a legal advisor, very few from family or friends, and almost no one reported that they heard about legacy giving from a donor. So one of the things for us to think about is how much time and effort should we devote to peer-to-peer solicitations for plan giving, because it seems that that is not what people remember. Table 10 may be helpful to us as we start to think about how to deploy our assets, and this might inform some of our marketing. So nearly half of donors said they first learned about a legacy gift in a personal conversation with a representative from the nonprofit. That's good news. It's something we probably need to think about now in the days of the pandemic, and figure out a way to have a personal conversation without necessarily being face-to-face. Mailings still seem to be a good, solid way to reach donors with this information. Interestingly, emails and websites ranked further down, although we'll see in a minute, they did appreciate getting information that way. Moving on, and here is one of the points where I think there's a bit of heresy. This quarrels with the findings of Russell James and some of those folks. There were several questions asked to determine how comfortable are you thinking about your own mortality and thinking about the idea of death in general. 80 to 85% of these individuals reported that they're neutral to comfortable, to very comfortable thinking about their own mortality. Now, I would note a couple of things about this. Keep in mind that the people who were surveyed are people who have already made a planned gift, so they've already thought all of this through, and they have told the charitable organization about it. So this is skewed, and when you read Russell James' research, he's talking more about the general population. So I don't think this is necessarily at odds with some of that wisdom. The other thing that fascinates me is these are plan giving donors, and what they report is they're pretty comfortable talking about their own mortality. And I wonder if that should change the way that we have the conversations, because maybe getting comfortable with thinking about your own mortality is a precursor to thinking about a charitable gift at all. So maybe this should inform the way that we condition our messages, because I know that we try to be comfortable, we try to be sensitive, and we somewhat stumble around this whole question. The other thing that occurred to me is in the time of the pandemic, in the time of the COVID-19 virus, this topic is front of mind for people. So there may be an opportunity here to further plan giving conversations that wouldn't have been possible even a year ago. There's a good section of the study that deals with gifts and how it affected giving and what sorts of donors make these gifts. You'll see in Table 6, no surprise here, I don't think, the largest plan gifts tend to be charitable bequests. Retirement plans come up behind in a distant second. Charitable trusts, then gift annuities. I was a bit surprised that gift annuities are less than 9%. Insurance policies, 5%. Retained life estate. My odds-on favorite plan gift of all time is a paltry 2%. So I don't think it's too surprising that it's charitable bequests. And as we saw, the institutional force to work toward irrevocable gifts, maybe not that important or not as important as we thought, because donors tend not to change those provisions after they've made them. Figure 10, I think, is very interesting. These tend to be very large gifts. As you can see, the shape of that curve is skewed way to the six figures and well into the multi-million-dollar figures. So these tend to be the very largest gift that an individual will make during her or his lifetime. These are not small gifts at all. We can dive a little bit deeper into the type of gift. This chart, figure 11, requires a bit of explanation. So first of all, the researchers excluded the top 3%. So they were trying to not allow outliers to skew the results. And then they've displayed for us both the mean, the average, that's the light-colored bar, and the median. And if you remember your freshman statistics class, the median is when we line all of the values up from lowest to highest. The median is the one right in the middle. So it's less skewed. What you see here is charitable trust. The average gift is very large, but it's skewed by by a few large gifts, and really we want to focus on the median instead. Charitable gift annuities, retirement plan beneficiary designations, I think is interesting. So large gifts, 6 figures, well into the 6 figures, but also skewed a bit. And then my favorite, retained life estate, maybe it's redeeming itself here a little bit. Those tend to be fairly large gifts as well. Both median and mean tend to be well into the mid 6 figures. So it's helpful, I think, to remind our organizations we really are working on large gifts and actually very large gifts. Figure 13. So one of the issues that I think organizations worry about is, who do we focus on? Do we focus on current donors, or do we look for new prospects? And there are institutions that require their plan giving programs to generate their own new prospects and to keep their hands off of donors. It turns out that's probably a mistake. In figure 13, the respondents were asked when do they remember having made their first gift to the organization. Now keep in mind they were answering this question in the spring, in the early months of 2019. And most of them, as you can say, almost 40%, made their first gift 30 years before, in the 1980s. And almost everyone had made, if you total those up, almost everyone had made a gift to the organization before they made their legacy gift. In figure 14, we'll see how current they are. So our friends in annual giving talk about Libunts. These people are not Libunts. 2019, remember, we're only 4 months into 2019 when they answered this question. These are people who, by and large, are still making gifts every year, year in and year out. So one of the takeaways for me is we need to focus on donors. A regular gift history is probably the best indicator of a plan giving prospect. And not necessarily, on figure 15, not necessarily an enormous gift history. That doesn't seem to correlate quite so much. What you see on figure 15 is the approximate total value of lifetime contributions to the organization to which I made my legacy gift. And a good share of them, half of them, are under $25,000. So looking at the previous slide and this slide together, you can see these are people who make modest but regular gifts year in and year out, and then at the end of their lifetime make an enormous 6-figure gift, a gift that is many times larger than their gift history would suggest. One of the things this suggests to me is we really need to market plan giving to all donors, regular donors, regardless of the size of their gift history. Shifting gears for a minute here, figure 17, the study asked about why, and there are a series of questions in the study itself, but why did you choose to make the gift, your legacy gift, to the organization? Some things here that stand out to me: firsthand knowledge. So I'm interpreting that as a personal relationship with somebody who can speak to the organization. The two real outliers are, I expect the organization will be around for a long time, and it's got a track record of success. There's some self-fulfilling prophecy here. Who would not want to be affiliated with an organization that will be around for a long time and is successful? Interesting to me, though, is the very shortest bar you'll see right there in the middle. Help me with the process of making a gift. It doesn't seem to have mattered much. Now, keep in mind, this is as reported by people who have made a plan gift. It may well be that we were very helpful, but they don't remember that as being an important factor in how they made or why they made their gift. And again, I'm asking you to suspend at least temporarily your inclination to argue with some of these. This is simply what actual donors of planned gifts reported. There's a good section of the report that talks about what sort of contact do you have with the nonprofit, with the organization to which you made this gift. And you can see a good percentage of them report that they've attended events. Almost everybody seems to get emails and mailings from us. About 2/3 say that they have personal visits. Less than half actually visit the nonprofit. About 40% visit the website. Contrast this with what was said earlier, that it isn't that important, but they do seem to spend time on our websites. And you can see the others: phone calls, 37%, and following the nonprofit on social media comes in under 25%. One of the interesting features of this report is there's a good section on the level of recognition and the desired recognition. And I pulled out figure 21 because I think this is a serious issue for us right now, especially as our organization's budgets are under stress, as we need to really be good stewards of organizational resources. And you'll see on this graph, this is the light colored bars are what percentage of donors said that they wanted this kind of recognition. The dark colored bars are what percentage of organizations said they delivered this recognition. So a list of legacy donors, just to take the first column, a list of legacy donors, about 35-40% said that they'd like to be listed on a list of legacy donors, and 60 or 65% of the organizations do that. Membership in a legacy society, actually a bit more important to donors than apparently we are doing. Personalized contact, here we may be overdoing it a bit. About 30% of donors say they really want personalized contact, and we're doing that about twice as often as donors might want. A dinner or other event, we are overperforming here as well. 20-25% of donors are interested in that, and we're doing it more than 50% of the time. Exclusive communications, you can see. Interesting to me is the one on the far right. Almost 40% of donors say, I don't really want any recognition at all. And very few of us are not recognizing them. Now, that's a kind of a trick question, because you all have had the experience that I've had. We honor their inclination to say that they want no recognition at all, and then their nose is out of joint because we didn't recognize them. So there's a balance there, and there could be some distortion in the way that people answered that question. Table 14 is similar data, but in numerical form. But I think this is a telling report for us. 40% of donors say they want to be listed on a list of donors, and 70% of the time we do it. That number that I cited before, 40% say they don't really want to be recognized, and 3% of the time we acknowledge that. We need to think carefully, I think, about how we're deploying our resources. Some of these things are very expensive. For example, a dinner or other public event, about 1 out of 4 or 5 donors say that they really like attending dinners and public events. And yet, as you can see, we're doing that more than half of the time. So we are really overperforming there. Being interviewed for a newsletter or a magazine, I know that it's motivating to other donors. It's an important part of our communications. And yet, apparently, donors aren't that enthusiastic about that. So one of the things we need to do is rethink how we're making use of our resources, because there's no point in spending time and resources on things that donors don't seem to want, or at least that they report that they're uninterested in. There's a part of the report that asks about what sort of stewardship did you get after you let them know that you made the gift. Table 13 displays some of this. This is what donors said changed as a result of their notifying the organization that they have made the gift. Almost all the time, 70% of the time, donors feel like they're getting invited to more events. And more than half of the time, donors feel that they're getting contacted more often. About 1 time out of 3, they feel like they're getting more involved. Interesting to me, they don't necessarily feel that they're getting asked for more often for gifts. And I was surprised at that. I think the folklore probably is donors are afraid that they're going to get asked more often, but it doesn't seem to be happening. Good news, we're not asking less often either, nor are we contacting them less often. So again, here, if we read this for what it is, this is what actual plan giving donors have said about their experience post notifying the organization. Maybe we need to rethink how we contact donors, and maybe some consistent but light stewardship is more appropriate. Finally, the study did ask a number of questions to try to get at why don't you tell the organization? And if you're thinking hard about this, you're going to realize the people who were interviewed are people who told the organization. So how could we get at a question that says, why did you choose not to tell the organization? From the structure of the report, I'm assuming that these are people saying about why they didn't, commenting about why they didn't notify other organizations, obviously other than the organization that participated in the study. So I may have multiple charitable bequests, and I've told my alma mater, but not the other organizations. That's the context of this question. And the question was, why did you choose not to tell them? And they could provide multiple answers. You can see why they didn't want the special attention or recognition. That dovetails with the commentary on stewardship. They want to retain control over the gift, so I might need to change my mind, and I don't want to have notified the organization and then have to let them know that things changed. There's a healthy fear of being asked for other gifts. Thought it was too personal. Simply, the organization didn't ask. About 12% of respondents said, well, nobody asked me. And some number, and again, this may be a growing concern these days, but some number of individuals, about 1 in 10, were concerned that the nonprofit wouldn't respect their privacy. So where do we go from here? And I have several thoughts about what we ought to do. First of all, as I said, I think it's important to take this study for what it is. This is simply the commentary, the remarks that actual plan giving donors have made. It may be at odds with some of our cherished beliefs, but I think we can take several things away from it. First of all, I think our marketing might need to be a little different than we thought. I think we need to start marketing charitable bequests, especially, much earlier than we thought. This notion that we should focus on the very oldest plan giving donors, that's probably not very productive. I think that bequest donors need to be stewarded lightly, but consistently. They're not going to reduce their other giving, and their plan gifts will likely be the largest gift of their lifetime. So it's probably important to start working on that early, even though it's going to take decades. And I think our marketing needs to focus on donors. There's not a lot of point in trying to do a lot of discovery for plan gifts. It's actually people who have made the commitment to making a contribution, and a plan gift is seen as an extension of that. I think we do need to keep it simpler than we do, and apparently our donors already think it's pretty simple. At least that's what they report. We need to be able to explain it clearly, but we need to avoid a temptation to fog it up with a lot of details or make it sound complicated. Maybe estate expectancies are different than we thought. They're usually the largest gift of a lifetime, well into the 6 figures, but percent provisions tend to be the largest. And I think most importantly, substitute giving just doesn't seem to happen. And I know that's an argument that rages at different times, particularly if you're in a campaign mode. But the fact is, people do not somehow make a charitable bequest as an easy way out. They make a charitable bequest in addition to their other gifts. And two of the most affirming findings in the report. The report says that between 5 and 8% of donors make planned gifts, but 1 in 3 report that they would consider it. So there's an enormous number of people who would consider making a planned gift that somehow aren't doing it. And again, as I said at the beginning, the report suggests that all fundraisers need to be equipped with a basic knowledge of planned gift vehicles and at least be prepared to engage donors in that conversation. Maybe not carry it all the way through. But to me, this is the real opportunity for us. This is the real opportunity to expand planned giving for our organizations and to, in many ways, make planned giving a part of the mainstream. We're going to pause in a moment here to take some questions. I want to do 2 things here at the end, and this is in your slides, and I'll come back to video in a minute. First of all, I want to say special thanks to Dr. Elizabeth Dale. She's an associate professor at Seattle University. She was the lead researcher on this and was just tremendously helpful to me over the summer. She shared the graphics that you've seen so that you didn't have to help explain this. She also spent an inordinate amount of time explaining to me some of the statistical analysis. At certain points, I actually had to tell her to stop emailing me back because she was answering my questions from a vacation. So kudos to Dr. Dale, first of all, for leading this study, but also for sharing so freely of her time. And then the GivingUSA website, givingusa.org, the launch video is still up there. You can watch it for free. You'll hear Dr. Dale review some of the research, and then there's some pretty important commentary available. And then again, I'm not getting a commission on this, but if you haven't had an opportunity to read this study, I would really suggest that you do. There is so much more in those pages than we were able to cover here today. So with that, I'm going to attempt to click exactly the right button. And John, tell me if I did that wrong.
Nope, you did it right. I see
Excellent.
you. Yeah, very nicely done. Craig, that was incredible. I'll admit I was one of those people who saw the report, even got the digital and the hard copy when it first came out, and then 2020 hit. So appreciate you walking through not only the information from the report, but also what it all means for us. And we do have a few questions, so let's get to some of those. So Lori Goldstein, American Red Cross, says, thanks for the comments on figure 13 and 14 about the current giving patterns of legacy donors. What should we understand from the header, not less, more? So what did you mean by that exactly?
I was being a bit facetious with the headers, so don't take them too seriously. What I'm trying to get at is sometimes inside organizations, there is this attitude that somehow planned giving is going to reduce other types of giving. Turns out it doesn't. Turns out donors understand that planned giving is one of the ways they can participate in an organization. So I just meant let's push back a little bit if the argument is, let's not tell them about planned giving because they'll reduce their giving. Clearly that's not the case. This is add-on giving. This is additional giving.
Great, thank you. Olivia Meyer from Christian Living Community says, can you provide some suggested stewardship given some of the responses around how donors do and do not want to be stewarded? So examples of what she says is light stewardship.
There's a little bit of that in the report itself. So what I'm suggesting now is not from the report. It seems clear to me that donors want us to acknowledge that they made these gifts. They want the confidence. They want to have confidence in us. They want to know that we're going to use it correctly. But they're a little self-effacing about this giving. So I would be a little more cautious about, I think I'd be a little more cautious about throwing the spotlight on a donor. And I know in my career, sometimes I've gotten a bit heavy-handed about insisting that donors tell us their story because it'll be motivating to others. Donors want a little bit of sense of privacy about this. So recognize them, yes, but not make too big a deal about it. I'm sorry, it seems like I'm talking around that, but I think it's important that we think carefully about what donors are saying. And what they're saying in this survey is, don't make too big a deal about this. Understand that it's important to me and to you, but don't go out of your way to hoist me to your shoulders and carry me around the room. That isn't the point. That isn't why I've done this.
Great, thank you. So John Burtness has a question. It says, I'm curious about planned giving donor listing. So this kind of gets to that point as well, particularly now that so many nonprofits are going to web-only lists or annual reports. It seems to make the listing much more public and accessible, and he wonders how much we should be bringing this to donors' attention or how they feel about being publicly listed. So I think you kind of answered that, but yeah, if you could explain.
Yeah, good commentary. And I think particularly in today's world, I'm not pointing my fingers at anybody except maybe myself. We had a tendency to be a bit cavalier about, we're going to put you on our Heritage Society list. And we sort of told them we were doing that. We didn't ask them if we could. I think in today's world, it's probably important to get an affirmative, to make that an opt-in. Having said that, I think there are really powerful ways to create that sort of listing. Years ago at the Mayo Clinic, they had a book, and it was in the lobby, and you could go read statements, testimonials from donors. I believe that's gone online now. But that's a way to engage donors in creating these little testimonies and statements. But I sure wouldn't do that in today's world, as I said, without having an affirmative okay from the donor that we can do that.
Great, thank you. Josie Stewart, hi Josie, from Denver Zoological Foundation, says Russell James' research indicates people do remove charity more often, and wonders if these are the people who never tell charity. And I think I had a similar thought listening to the presentation, because I think he has some research that indicates that for donors who include a charity in their will, and you look at 10 years later, only about 50% of those same organizations are in the will. And so I think overall the message is very encouraging that 90+% either leave their bequests or increase their bequests, but does it dive into the makeup of those bequests in terms of which and how many organizations are included or dropped? So,
right, I think that's right, and I have worked around colleges and universities long enough to know I am not going to get in a crossfire between two PhDs discussing their research. This is one of those areas where I think Dr. Dale would say this is a different population than the one that Russell James is researching. But I think the answer is probably just as you suggest, John. And maybe for us the lesson is it's very important that we figure out how they want to be stewarded. The people who answered the GivingUSA survey obviously were treated right, because they were willing to notify the organization and willing to participate in this survey. And we want to treat our donors right so that they become part of that smaller population, not the bigger one where people change their mind.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm hearing from all this is, if we ever want to know how our donors want to be stewarded, just ask them, because it's different for everyone, and we can't apply general stewardship rules to all of them, although we can certainly, use the percentages that are out there. So
yeah, what a radical idea. Ask people what they want and then give it to them. And then they trust you.
Megan Fisher from Denver Museum of Nature and Science asks, how do you interpret Stuart Lively? Please offer specific activities. So I think you mentioned some of these are suggested in the report.
Yeah, some of them are suggested in the report. The one, and this may just be my personal bias, the one that I would encourage you to read and think about, it's not really clear to me, having read this report, that donors appreciate being invited to events, especially Heritage Society sorts of events, Legacy Society events. And I've wondered about that for a long time, and I'm thinking out loud here, which is always dangerous, and particularly given the pandemic circumstances, it could be a real burden for a donor to just be invited to an event and try to figure out how to gracefully step aside from it. So I think we need to think about some of those more public stewardship acts. We think we're being grateful, we think we're being gracious, but it turns out maybe we're creating some discomfort for our donors.
Interesting. So Charlie Gordy from Harvard Law School, hi Charlie, thanks for joining us from Boston, said, we send an annual Thanksgiving Day card with a fall campus photo that people really seem to enjoy. And that's one example of light stewardship. So I think that's a great point, that it's a light touch. It's also very inexpensive. I think donors don't want to spending a lot of money on them most of the time. I've also heard of calendars being sent out with campus photos or photos of students that might include reminders of upcoming events and that sort of thing. So thanks, Charlie. That's a great example. Karen Shaw, University of Denver, hi Karen, says, since it seems that working with a nonprofit is harder in terms of, or more complicated in terms of a donor developing their plans, do you have thoughts on ways we can simplify our processes so that we aren't complicating things for our donors?
We need to fight against our very human nature. If I have spent a lot of time learning about all the rules around gift annuities, I want to tell somebody about it. And it turns out that maybe that's not what donors need from me. What they need from me is for me to be able to confidently say to them, there's a way that you can get an income after you make a gift. And I don't need to necessarily tell them about all the rules involving community property and appreciated assets, even though I know that, and even though sooner or later they need to hear that. We tend to be proud of our knowledge and then want to share it, and sometimes that sounds too complicated to donors. I think part of what you're seeing, and I don't remember exactly which table it is, part of what you're seeing there is exactly that. When the charity got involved, then they started sharing all sorts of details. And this is not said in the report, this is my intuition. When my financial advisor was involved, she or he was simplifying it and giving me information in bite-sized pieces. The charity was more of an information dump, and that made me nervous. That made it more complicated. I think that's what's behind that finding.
Great, thank you. Nick Lopez from Volunteers of America, Colorado, says he would appreciate any insights or research you may have about board members and plan gifts. Conventional wisdom would lead some to think that these are easier and bigger plan gifts for organizations to secure. What are your thoughts on that, and does the research indicate that?
I don't recall commentary in the research specifically about board members. There is some discussion about volunteers. But remember, one of the charts indicated that donors at least don't remember hearing about it from another donor, from another volunteer. So again, this is one of our fondly held beliefs, is that if our board chair gets up there and makes the pitch for charitable bequests, everyone's going to be motivated. Donors at least don't seem to remember it that way. I'm not suggesting that our volunteers and our board members ought to ignore it, but we probably shouldn't be relying on them to carry that message, at least not primarily.
Great, thank you. Well, we have about 7 minutes left, and happy to give folks back a few minutes of time. But if you do have any other questions, we still have a bit of time. In the meantime, I'll read this comment from Miffy from St. Mary's Hospital Foundation. She says, just want to thank Craig for his presentation. He always inspires, and this survey is something worth having. So glad we have access to this information after the symposium. So I couldn't agree more, Miffy, and yeah, just so everyone knows, you will have access to the presentation, to the recording, and I think Craig's commentary, in addition to just the presentation itself, is so valuable. So just know that you will have access to that within a week or two once all the recordings are up. So thanks for that comment, Miffy. Karen Aylen from Freedom Service Dogs of America asks, given that info on legacy donors not wanting to is that donors don't want to attend special events, what meaningful benefits would you suggest offering Legacy Society donors?
I think they want to feel acknowledged, recognized, but not. Perhaps what they're telling us is, don't spend the resources buying me dinner. Don't spend the resources sending me trinkets. Don't spend, as Charlie Gordy mentioned, a postcard. Don't spend the resources sending me an expensive publication. A postcard will do. These are fairly humble individuals. at least about this aspect of their lives. Maybe they're different in real life, but they don't want us they want us to acknowledge that they've done this. It's a big deal for them, but they don't want us to make a fuss over them. That's the picture that I'm getting as I sort of cross my eyes and look at all the pages in the report.
Great, thank you. Well, we are just about at the end of our time here. I don't see any more questions in the queue, and so, Craig, do you have any parting words?
Only that this is one set of data, and these data conflict with some other things, and maybe they challenge us to think in some different ways. I would encourage us to do that. I think it is an important report because, as I said at the beginning, these are people who have already done what we're encouraging other people to do. They've already taken the steps that we hope every prospective donor will take, and this is what they have to say. So read from that perspective, I think it's a very valuable report. I am sorry that because of the way the world is, it probably got buried. I think it's a very important document, and we should all take some time and think about it. I'm happy to respond to people via email in the coming weeks, and I hope it's been useful for everybody. So thank you for inviting me, and thanks for hosting, John.
Oh, happy to do it, and I know that it's been useful for everyone who is on here, and the positive comments are flooding in already. So thanks so much again, Craig. Really, it's always a pleasure to have you, and we appreciate you breaking down this report. We'll let folks go here in just a minute. We have a half-hour sponsor engagement break, so please pop out to the lobby, visit some of our sponsors if you haven't already, pop into the CPGR Zoom room to chat with Tina and whoever else is there, and we will see you back here at 10:30 Mountain Time for our next set of sessions. Thanks, everybody.